To kick off our session, it's my pleasure to welcome Sean Graglia, mixed reality expert and lead marketing consultant at AlensiaXR, who will guide us through today's session. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks for kicking us off, Adam. Hi, folks. Sean Graglia, lead marketing for AlensiaXR and HoloAnatomy. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'll start by thanking everyone for spending time with us today and welcoming past friends and new connections. You know, it was 5 years ago, right in this room, when the direction of my professional life started a new direction. That's when I had an immersive anatomy instruction delivered remotely by an honored guest that I'll bring on later today. One thing I love about anatomy is it's such a relatable topic. And I've learned how a complex machine can actually be translated into something that can be better understanding using technology. So this session, we'll dive into why a leading medical institution made a bet on technology, forever changing the way anatomy was taught and learned. We'll also take a look at HoloAnatomy.next. It's the next release that was just announced for HoloAnatomy from AlensiaXR. So let me go over the agenda and we'll dive right in. So first, we're going to take a look. The goal of this session is to actually give you an insider view of why a leading medical institution would make this winning bet on XR technology for anatomy learning and how it might help your institution. You will also be among the first to see HoloAnatomy.next from AlensiaXR, our latest release. So I've broken it into really 3 different parts. First, we're going to dive into the case, and I've used a wordplay there, for XR anatomy learning. I'm going to bring on my honored guest, and she will share how Case Western Reserve University of Medicine actually achieved a bold vision using XR technology for anatomy learning. We'll dive into the learnings and the insights and the validation that they've gone through. Then we'll switch to HoloAnatomy.next. We'll take a next look at this latest version of how it builds on the legacy of education excellence from Case Western University. We'll explore what this technology means to the future of immersive anatomy learning. Finally, we'll spend some time taking your questions and exploring with my guest or Alencia and the HoloAnatomy team of what this could mean to your institution. So for the first part of my discussion today, it's my pleasure to welcome an honored guest who I'll ask to turn on her camera. I mentioned at the opening, getting hooked on HoloAnatomy with a remote learning session. It's a great honor to welcome my instructor and one of the key visionaries behind HoloAnatomy, Dr. Susanne Wish-Baratz, for today's conversation. Dr. Wish-Baratz is a professor of anatomy at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, and she's a nationally recognized leader in anatomy, education, and innovation. She played a pivotal role in the development of HoloAnatomy and HoloAnatomy Neuro. Welcome, Dr. Wish-Baratz.
Thanks, Sean.
So let's start at the beginning. How did HoloAnatomy come to be, and how did you become involved?
So over a decade ago, we needed to build a new education building. And as head of the medical anatomy course at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, I was charged with creating a state-of-the-art anatomy lab. And I traveled throughout the country, visiting a variety of dissection labs, looking at the various surgical lights and tables and so forth, and storage. Suddenly, really out of the blue, I was informed that we would actually not have wet labs at our new health education campus. Dissection labs were costly to maintain, especially like the HVAC, and the administration believed that there were 21st century ways to teach our students anatomy. And so then I was charged with looking for futuristic ways to teach anatomy, and we looked at a variety of different approaches. And as we did, unbeknownst to me and our team, I would say, the president of our university and the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic were also looking for new ways to teach anatomy. And they came across a new immersive technology that was just being developed by Microsoft. It was the Microsoft HoloLens. And they brought it to campus, and they brought me into a room, and they put this device on my head. And I looked around and I saw the atrium of our new building where I'm actually seated right now. And it was pretty cool. And I said, they said, "This is how you're going to be teaching anatomy." And I was like, "That's great. Where's the anatomy?" And little by little, I grew to understand that I was going to be the one, with a team of people, of course, who would be creating the anatomy. Needless to say, this was not my wheelhouse, and I was more than skeptical at the beginning. But over time, and with the investment and belief and support by the university, we did it.
What really strikes me about what you shared is how it started out as a real challenge that needed to be addressed, and healthy skepticism about how this might come about. So when this had to be a significant undertaking, how did the solution actually come together?
Well, first I have to tell you that initially I saw this as a great threat. Cadaveric dissection has been the cornerstone of anatomy education for centuries, for generations. And as I said, the university supported this undertaking. And little by little, we understood that this could actually be an opportunity instead of a threat. So we formed an interprofessional team, and I keep using the term little by little because this was a process, a very slow, sometimes painful, meticulous process. But little by little, we began to create all the anatomy our medical students need to know to be prepared for their clinical clerkships and beyond.
Interesting. And one curiosity that's come about is the decision that was made to create anatomical drawings versus cadaver images. How did that direction come about?
So first of all, and I get this question rather frequently, it's important to consider that we are training our students to treat living patients, not cadavers. The anatomy of a living patient is very different from that of a cadaver. And even I personally always studied with hand-drawn anatomical images from Netter's Atlas or Grant's. I never preferred photographic anatomical atlases when I studied as a student. And in addition, it's important, I always say, just like we look different on the outside, we look different on the inside. And we wanted to create a body that represented the most common presentation of anatomy for our students. So for the sake of clarity, from the get-go, we actually decided to use art instead of photography. We also found that the anatomy that we want our students to learn can be learned equivalently either with a cadaver or on this application that we were creating that we began to call HoloAnatomy. But as you know, and I know that this might not be the place to say it, but I have to acknowledge that there are lessons that a cadaver, that the human body donor can teach our students that are invaluable, like anatomical variation. When I have 24 bodies in a room, because we do still, and I'll tell you about this maybe in a bit, when we have 24 bodies in a room, our students learn that just like we look different on the outside, we look different on the inside. We have very young students. This is for many their first exposure to death, and to understand death as a part of life, as opposed to a failure of medicine. Even exposure to something like nudity, sorry. You know, many doctors have told me that they see their dissection experience as either their first patient encounter or even as a rite of passage. But note what I didn't say. I didn't say that students require a cadaver to learn anatomy. And in fact, we've done some research that's shown that this is not the case. And actually, I do want to point out, because we've also created neuroanatomy, this HoloAnatomy Neuro, and that's at least as valuable as HoloAnatomy itself, because so much of neuroanatomy is, I don't really know who's out in the audience, but all anatomists know, is that much of neuroanatomy cannot be viewed via dissection. Like, for example, the tracts. And we, in HoloAnatomy Neuro, have tracts illustrated in 3 dimensions, so that students can follow through the central nervous system, watching the synapses, decussations, and watch nerves actually from the central nervous system to the periphery or vice versa. So there's great value in this.
One of the things I've heard you say across anatomy and neuroanatomy is that ability to make the invisible visible. And the other thing that struck me about our conversations here in the past is being able to understand those spatial relationships between the structures. So I love how you framed the shift that happened from uncertainty to opportunity to innovation, and how much care was taken in making sure the anatomy was represented properly. And it's clear the right investments were made with the right experts to actually bring the solution and anatomy to life, to your point. I know from my own personal technology adoption experience that just having the solution isn't always enough. So did you have to prove the solution that would meet academic needs before you rolled it out?
Of course we did. We published several studies. One of our first studies compared the performance of students who studied musculoskeletal anatomy either on HoloLens or HoloAnatomy or on cadaver, but then completed exams on both modalities. And we found a really high correlation of 0.74 between performance on both exams, which indicated that students did equivalently on either exam, which means that if a student did well on one, they did well on the other. If a student did poorly on one, they did poorly on the other. After that, from our evidence, we saw that maybe it was quicker for students to study using HoloLens. So we essentially duplicated that study, but we had 64 students in two different groups, dissection, non-dissection, and we also included a time variable. And we discovered that HoloAnatomy may actually reduce the time required for anatomy didactics without sacrificing student learning. The outcomes for the learning, the test performance was the same. But students spent significantly less or equivalent amounts of time using HoloAnatomy as compared to cadaveric dissection. And yet, HoloAnatomy users performed as well as or better than the control group on both the cadaveric and the HoloAnatomy practical exams.
Incredible
There
findings.
was one other study. I just want to tell you, sorry,
Yeah.
interrupt you. There was one other study I want to mention. It was just a preliminary study, but we had students supplementing cadaveric dissection, with HoloAnatomy, and we found that 6 months after they had all taken their final exam, the students who did supplement with HoloAnatomy performed better on a delayed post-test than the students who didn't supplement, indicating that potentially students retain the information better.
Incredible findings. I really appreciate the rigor that was put in to make sure that there were results that you needed in the anatomy learning before you rolled it out. A couple of findings jump out at me. Really, was you talked about there were hints in one study about reduced study time without compromising performance. Very good finding. Another study you just mentioned, a preliminary study indicating improved retention. So it's great to see those indicators. Of course, all research concludes that more research is needed, but those are very impressive indicators. So this approach still seems to be pretty disruptive to the traditional methods, and we started talking about those at the top. How is this integrated with the curriculum? What needed to happen to make the solution come alive?
So what the process was fairly straightforward. We took our once we had created what we call the anatomy assets, we took our dissection lab guides and converted them into HoloAnatomy and HoloAnatomy Neuro lab guides that are aligned to our general medical curriculum, because that's how we teach. We essentially mashed up hit lists. Now, with the time that we saved with this modality, we were able to recreate our curriculum and do what you quoted me on this, but now I'm going to quote myself: bring anatomy to life. The curriculum that we created is known as GARLA, which is an acronym for Gross Anatomy, Radiology, and Living Anatomy. Basically, our students begin right day 2 of medical school with a 5-week introductory, peer-taught introduction to the language of anatomy and preparation for the next thing that we do, which is a 2-week dissection boot camp. The goal of which is not, as I mentioned earlier, to teach our students anatomy. It's to expose them to anatomical variation, expose them to death in a controlled setting, to nudity in a controlled setting, to the notion of donation. We have them reflecting all of these very, very valuable lessons that dissection provides. The anatomy we do next. The dissection takes place at our old medical school because, as I said, we don't have wet labs here. Our students, after the 2 weeks of what we call the dissection boot camp, and we test them, do practical exams in the lab, we bring them back to the new, what we call health education campus, where we implement the actual GARLA curriculum. Garlic curriculum is comprised of 3 parts. Each part is 35 minutes, and it's done in the same 2 hours that used to be reserved exclusively for cadaveric dissection, maybe with it like 15 minutes of radiology. Now we have 3 35-minute sessions that are divided into holoanatomy, radiology, and physical exams and ultrasounds on standardized or sometimes known as simulated patients. And so the way it works is our students rotate. They have a topic of the day, the anatomy that's whatever it is in the curriculum, and students learn the anatomy itself on the HoloLens, or now it's going to be actually on the MetaQuest, but on a mixed reality device. They rotate into the radiology reading room where a radiologist goes over the normal anatomy viewed on imaging. The students learn in preparation for their clerkships what tests to order if they want to see a given structure, if they want to identify something that's related to the anatomy of the day. The focus is on normal anatomy, as well as what tests to order with contrast, without contrast, and so forth. And we have pairs of students who scroll through DICOM images and do activities. And then in our living anatomy room, we have, as I mentioned, standardized or simulated patients who have residents and a physician instructor, groups of 4 students on, it's 4 students on each standardized patient. We have 8 in the room, and the students learn the clinical or the physical diagnosis. How do I examine the given anatomy of the day? And they view it on ultrasound. And in so doing, with the time we've saved from dissection, we are able to demonstrate the anatomy as the students are going to see it in the clinic. So this really is an opportunity for us to prepare them for what they want to become, which is physicians.
Excellent. A couple of things strike out at me we just talked about. I love how integrated it is with your curriculum. It's just part of how you're teaching anatomy now. And the other thing that struck me is I often talk to different institutions who don't have access to wet lab at all, and that works well for them. And other institutions like yourselves, a common message I hear from actually the students is how much they enjoy being able to go back to holoanatomy from the wet lab and relearn or reinforce everything they've seen and then go back. So thank you very much for sharing that. You shared an amazing journey from the challenge to the opportunity to the validation and then the implementation and ultimately academic impact. It's clear from our conversation that holoanatomy was built on a solid foundation, crafted by experts, and it's addressing real challenges in anatomy education. So HoloAnatomy.next, which I'm going to shift a little bit to, was just released by AlensiaXR, and it's built on that foundation, now ushering in a new era of immersive anatomy learning, as you mentioned, on the MetaQuest 3 and potentially other devices in the future. So let's take a look at that. Adam, if you wouldn't mind rolling the HoloAnatomy.next introduction video.
I'm Dr. Sue Wish-Baratz. I run the anatomy course at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. HoloAnatomy has completely transformed how we teach anatomy. We are able to demonstrate anatomy efficiently without students investing limited curricular time on dissection and deciphering cadavers. Building a lesson in the HoloAnatomy Hub enables me to customize lessons to the specific anatomy that we want students to learn and interact with in the sequence we want them to learn it in. Because it is customizable, we can teach either by region or by system. I can manipulate 3D models, highlight key structures and labels. I can even create step-by-step instructions for students. It enables me to customize a meaningful learning experience rather than just preparing another lecture.
HoloAnatomy Neuro is a game changer when it comes to teaching neuroanatomy because we can actually see color-coded aspects of these tracks in their full length, including the first order neurons down to the second and even tertiary neurons. One of the downfalls that we have is that we can't see these structures grossly on spinal cords or brain slices. HoloAnatomy Neuro allows us to see these structures in their full integrity. and we can actually tell what tracks we're looking at because we can color code things, and we can break down the first to second order neuron synapses. We can go through and actually show full integration from sensory components down to the motor components and where they interconnect, which allows students to actually learn this content better compared to what we see with just using myelin stains or yarn in place of these structures.
A lot of times with classroom learning and the 2D visuals, you get a sense of what's happening physiologically, but I think being able to see it in a 3D model and being able to follow different structures really helps us figure out like what's happening, not just in normal physiology, but also like in the pathogenesis of XYZ, exactly which structures are affected, and then downstream of that, what structures nearby might be affected by a tumor in whatever structure, or by a blockage in a certain artery. So I think having that 3D visual is very helpful.
With HoloAnatomy, my students fully comprehend areas of human anatomy that are difficult to see with traditional methods of teaching. This isn't just a new way to teach, it's a new way to learn. Our research has indicated that students may spend less time studying and may even retain information better when using HoloAnatomy. I can see the difference it's making.
Well, thank you. We actually filmed that recently in the very room that HoloAnatomy is used to teach anatomy at Case Western Reserve University. And of course, you heard Dr. Wish-Baratz mention a few of the things that we covered in our conversation. I'm going to invite Dr. Wish-Baratz back for her thoughts on HoloAnatomy.next a little later. I just want to take a few minutes to share a little bit more about this recent innovation and the impact that we think it's going to have on learning. So HoloAnatomy.next platform really consists of just 3 ingredients. First, there's the HoloAnatomy Hub. Now, the Hub is where the instructors, and you heard in the video, add the magic ingredients to drive their learning outcomes. And so using this desktop app, instructors pull in the specific anatomical content or 2D images needed for their curriculum. The second piece is the XR viewer. And the viewer is where the magic actually happens with the students and the instructors. Now on MetaQuest 3, as we mentioned earlier, it's capable actually running on future XR devices. And we look forward to doing that. And the viewer is actually where the students build their spatial understanding of the human body. And the third piece of this mix is the anatomical library. And you heard us mention earlier, let me just go through that. There's 2 pieces. There's HoloAnatomy, which is designed for gross anatomy, and there's neuroanatomy to complement. So HoloAnatomy actually covers about 7,000 different structures across 15 male and female systems to align with gross anatomy. And Neuro, a separate product, really consists of the neural pathways and cross sections of the spinal column, spinal cord and brainstem. So now let's take a look at what those look like. And I'll ask Adam to roll a little clip and I'll walk you through what the hub looks like. So here we are in HoloAnatomy Hub, where I'm starting to create the content. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually start a new scene. Think of a scene as a focus in a lesson. And so I'm going to be able to go and choose the model that I want to work with. And I can choose from the pick list. In this case, male anatomy. And I'm going to go down the list and we're going to look at the muscular system to start with. And so you can see what that looks like. I add it to the scene. And now I'm able to zoom out and actually position it how I want. So in this case, I'll use the rotate tool. And I'll actually be able to move it left or right, and very simply in 3D space position where I need it, up and down, and side to side. And so now I've got it in a supine position where that actually aligns to my curriculum content. Now let's do another scene. And so this part focus of the lesson, we're going to look at the heart system. And this time I'm going to search for the structures that I'm looking for. So I search for the heart, I find the animated heart, I add that, and it comes into view. Now I'm looking for the pulmonary, and I will add structures, and I'll add the artery and the veins. And so you can continue going through this and fleshing out what you're looking to structure. Now I can select everything and manipulate. So now I can move the structures I've just added in 3D space. Maybe I want to position them slightly left or right, or up or down, so that I can make room for other structures that I put in there. And I can move that forward or backward, however I want that to be in 3D space. After doing that, I can actually make it larger or smaller. And so in here, we wanted to take a deeper look in the curriculum of how the operations are going in the heart. And so we make it bigger. And the last thing I'm going to do is actually add a real echocardiogram so that it complements the instruction that I'm pulling together. And so I've added that, I've repositioned it. Next, I want to add some labels. And so I can completely just click on the structure, add a label. I can adjust that label. I can add manual labels if I choose. So now I have something that matched our curriculum. And the last thing I'm going to do is add, and we mentioned HoloAnatomy Neuro, where we can go back into the library and actually choose neurophysiology and add it to the scene. And so now we can take a look at, well, maybe that's not everything that I need in there. And so we go back into the hierarchy list and say, okay, well, maybe I need to, I don't need the body. And maybe I can just remove the brain because I want to focus on the systems in the flow. And so I make these different changes. And then I can, as we did before, reposition things. So maybe I want to move that into a supine position so that we actually can walk through with students and help them cement, as how Brian mentioned earlier about going down the tracks and understanding where the flow of information goes. So now I've got it to the rotation and the size that I've got, and now I'm able to save it. And then I can hop into MetaQuest 3, and we're continuing to support HoloLens as well. But on the MetaQuest 3, this is now what we're seeing. And you kind of saw this in the earlier video where I'm actually able to dissect, I was able to remove a piece of the anatomy that I built up and additionally. And you can see Dr. Sue there moving it out to the side. And actually now the students can get in there and the lesson can be conducted. And they're all seeing the similar thing and they're able to comprehend a lot better in spatial relations. You also saw me create this seed where I'm now able to remove the structures and get really to the central of what we're going to talk about and take that heart in real live time in the MetaQuest 3 and actually make it bigger and be able to actually put my head into and actually see what's happening with the valves. How are the operations going? And so any of the students can actually participate this and really get a sense of that spatial understanding. And so that's what's going on here. And the last thing I mentioned, pulled together, was actually the neuro. And we're walking through a spine and we're actually able to understand how those structures come together, where that information is flowing. We're able to go start to finish and really get a sense of what's going on inside the body without actually having to go to a cadaver lab. And so that's a really quick run through of HoloAnatomy.next, and I'm just going to come back to cover. One sec. Place that. So let's go back and let me just recap a little bit about what we just saw. So HoloAnatomy.next is really about three things. And I hope the demo videos gave you a sense of how those tools are used to really drive what we're after here is better learning outcomes for anatomy and neuroanatomy. And we're happy to partner with you in more to explore in more detail and go into more of the solution. But it really comes down to three things. And first is, we discussed this at the beginning and throughout our conversation, the academic excellence is at the foundation of HoloAnatomy and HoloAnatomy Neuro. It was created by anatomists for anatomists. The second thing is that we've expanded on the platform flexibility across the globe. So we're now allowing instructors to share multiple anatomical structures or systems, multiple 2D images, and work on multiple XR devices. We talked about HoloLens, but we're now also working on MetaQuest 3. It now works on MetaQuest 3, and we're looking at future XR devices as they come out. So, and finally, the platform has been built to accommodate future content and future devices. And so when new content comes in, the system is flexible enough so we'll be able to include that quite a bit. Other anatomical structures or other 2D and 3D images that we want to pull in. So that's HoloAnatomy.next. And as we move to the Q&A portion of today's session, and I'll just advance there, I actually, the first question I want to ask is back to Dr. Wish-Baratz. So I'll ask her to come back on camera. And based on what you know, Dr. Wish-Baratz, what excites you the most when it comes to impacting student learning looking at HoloAnatomy.next?
I think the flexibility, first of all, the ability to add as many models as I desire to have in a given scene and position them where I want. Also, the various ways we can label on a variety of planes, move and large structures in real time. These are, I think, tools that will be quite valuable for me personally when I teach. I also think my students will love the capacity to manipulate, move, rotate, resize when they're studying on their own. So and that's, and for me, to be perfectly honest, the fact that I can put everything back if I feel like things are getting out of hand once they are manipulated. So the fact that I still have control, but I can also give them control to dissect out a little bit on their own. That is also a value to me, in my opinion. And probably the most exciting thing, and you saw the video of the animated heart. I'm really excited about of combining the cardiac cycle with an EKG, which we've already done. It's just not quite synced yet, so that the students can slow it down and really observe what's going on at each stage as they're watching the PQRS of the EKG. So that's really I think, part of what excites me the most. The other animation that excites me a lot is joint motion. We just started scapulohumeral rhythm, and we're working slowly on all of the joints. We've got all of the anatomy of the joints, and now we're trying to move them, so that students can, in a given lesson, see not only how a joint can move in the standard classic ways that we describe in anatomical education, but also what are the prime movers? What muscles highlight when I'm abducting my glenohumeral joint, for example? So a lot of things are really new and exciting in HoloAnatomy next that I look forward to using.
Oh, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with you and evolve the solution and rolling that out and really impacting your students in the future. One thing I appreciate you talking about was we talked a little bit about the medical school application, but some of the things you were just mentioning and especially with the joints come to mind, is when we took a look at health sciences, they're also looking to understand what are those spatial relationships, what links to which structure, and what the impact is. So even if it's kinesiology, they're looking for these spatial understandings. So thank you very much for sharing that. I will say thank you for helping us and for sharing your insights today. I'm sure there's more interested in learning from you. Adam, I'll bring you back. And are there any questions from Dr. Wish-Baratz?
Yes, of course. There's actually a lineup of questions happening, but it's been a pleasure to hear a legend of HoloAnatomy herself speak. And I'm going to start with the first question, which is, how did students react to using this new technology? Did you find them excited and more engaged?
I'm hesitating because I think our students, when they applied to medical school, knew that this is what how they were going to be learning. So there were no surprises here. I don't think our students are more engaged. I'll tell you where it is interesting. So we also are doing some training, but we bring students back to prepare them for residency. We do reviews. I work with fellows, like I've got hem-onc fellows coming in a couple weeks just to review the anatomy of bone marrow biopsy. Things that we used to do in the lab that the students never like going back to the lab. When we review with them in HoloAnatomy, they really like it. So while I can't really weigh in for our medical students because they knew what they were getting, so they obviously liked it or they wouldn't have come to study here, I see with other students, older students, they really like it. And we also even do some outreach with high school students and younger kids, especially from underserved areas, and they love it. So I think in general, I would say the technology is well received.
You reminded me another piece of research that came out of California Health Sciences University, where Dr. Charisse Richards actually did have an indication and measurement of the level of engagement. And generally, we understand a deeper engaged student tends to learn a little bit more. So we're starting to see those across other institutions as well. Thank you for sharing those insights. Adam, do you have another question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for that. We do have another question here. What advice would you have to programs considering this technology?
Well, if you're already considering it, I think that you have already, either you're building a new lab or you don't have or you're not going to have a lab, but you're beginning to understand that if your goal is to teach anatomy in the 21st century, we no longer need cadaveric dissection. Cadaveric dissection, as I said, we are blessed to have cadaver labs, and we are actually renovating our cadaver labs to teach a lot, to teach, as I said, anatomical variation, exposure to death, and so forth. But when it comes to learning anatomy, I would say that you should, my advice would be, remember where we are in history, and that we really can teach the material faster because time is of the essence here. You know, we don't have the time that we had to teach anatomy 100 years ago, when that was the foundation of medical education. So remember where you are in history, and how what we need to do is to teach the material in the most effective and efficient way possible. And I think we're onto something with HoloAnatomy, particularly because they can view things in 3 dimensions. Like a lot of the other applications that I looked at before we developed this were, at the end of the day, on a screen.
Excellent. I know, I think we've got a couple more questions there too.
Yep, we got a couple more. How would you, what would you recommend for larger groups of classes? Up to 100 potentially?
We have 180. So what we have to do, because it depends how big a space. Like I was just talking to somebody who has an enormous program. If you can use a gymnasium, you know, especially now with the MetaQuest, which isn't that expensive, you know, you can probably do, you know, you can teach it in one run if you want. We can't. We don't have the devices, and so we have our students divided into thirds, and we have to repeat our teaching 3 times on Tuesdays and 3 times on, it's not, actually our students are divided into 6, three groups on Tuesday, 3 groups on Thursday. So we have to repeat teach, which is, for some of my colleagues, is a bit rough. So it just depends. With a large group, we have to repeat.
Wonderful. Thank you for that answer. And I know one of our partners as well have 80 students at once. And I would like to ask, so someone asked about a function for placing a pin for when you have a label. How simple is it? Can you give us a little bit of background around that?
Oh, we've been doing exams. In fact, we can do exams with 4 students standing around in the same pod, viewing different holograms during an exam, because we want to make sure that they're not looking at, copying. So we can place pins really easily. Making an exam is super easy. And with HoloAnatomy next, it's actually even easier, because with the original HoloAnatomy, we had to place all of our pins around one plane. And now we can use any plane that we want, which makes it a little bit easier. We usually do A and B, just like we do in the cadaver lab. We have 2 pins per station in the cadaver lab and 2 pins per what we call scene here on HoloAnatomy. It's really easy. It's the same as a label. Like we'll have the question on as a label. A, identify or innervation, whatever it is, and B, whatever the question is.
Wonderful. That is great information. And I'll send it back to you, Sean. That's all the questions we have right now.
Awesome. Well, this was great. I think we've kind of scratched the surface today, but I want to thank Dr. Wish-Baratz again for sharing all of your insights and answering those great questions. I'll just do a little quick close and send people on their way. And so, really, we scratched the surface. We touched on the solution. We touched on the impact. But we can go deeper. And so we're excited about our next webinar on May 14th, where we're going to be having a conversation with Dr. Joanne Hodder about her personal experience as an educator using immersive anatomy and allied health, so a different type of anatomy learning. And so we'll make sure that you have the URL to register there. In addition to our next webinar, webinars are actually a great way to gain insight from other institutions. And if you go and check into our website, and we'll put the link to that in the chat, you'll be able to see past webinars where we featured TCU, which is a few weeks ago, AT Still University, Kansas.com, and Finger Lakes College even. And so take a look at those past webinars, and it's a great opportunity to also learn on the site. And so as you explore the site, you're going to find the research that we talked about earlier, and then you can go in depth into some of those partner stories and understand how they've adopted and how they've been able to change. AlensiaXR also recognizes that it's a challenge that you as educators face in trying to navigate accelerating technology on the path to better learning outcomes, which is where everyone wants to achieve. So let us help you navigate that future of immersive learning. With our XR experience and our academic foundation, we're well equipped to help you through that journey. And so when you're at the point where you actually want to go deeper and get a better understanding for your institution, dive into a lot more of what I showed you in the demonstration that we had recorded today, just reach out to us and we'll explore it together. So this concludes our formal part of the presentation today. I want to close with a final thank you. Dr. Wish-Baratz, thank you so much for joining and sharing your story and for all the help you've done with HoloAnatomy over the past years. And thank everyone who joined us for the webinar today. As a follow-up to the webinar, you will receive a survey when the webinar ends. We'd really appreciate your feedback and recommendations. We really like to adapt and build on your feedback that comes through. And you'll also be receiving a follow-up email in the next couple of days with the links and the material that we reviewed. And you'll be able to watch this again on demand. So thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to continuing the discussion.